She thought she had it all. The man, the money, the first-class ticket to paradise. But when Amber sauntered onto the gleaming private jet, she found one obstacle: the quiet wife of her lover. What starts as a power play at 40,000 feet becomes the most devastating humiliation of her life. She was about to learn that the woman she dismissed as nothing didn't just have a seat on the plane. She owned the entire airline. This is the story of how a mistress's arrogance led to her ultimate downfall. The air at the Teterboro private lounge hummed with a different kind of silence. It wasn't the absence of sound, but the muffling of it by deep pile carpets, plush velvet upholstery, and the unspoken understanding that everyone present was wealthy enough not to speak above a polite murmur. Amber, however, had never been good with polite murmurs. She checked her reflection in the gold-leaf mirror, adjusting the strap of her crimson Prada dress. Her blonde hair, the product of a 6-hour salon visit, cascaded over her shoulders. She was, in a word, immaculate, a predator draped in luxury. Her phone buzzed. A text from Gregory. "Just landed. Walking over. You better be ready." A slow, satisfied smile spread across her face. Ready. She'd been ready for this her entire life. Gregory Fordham was her ticket, not just to this lounge or the waiting Gulfstream G700 outside, but to everything. He was a titan of finance, a shark in a Zegna suit, and he was, for all intents and purposes, hers. She picked up her Chanel bag and walked toward the discreet door leading to the tarmac. A lounge attendant, all smiles and deference, opened it for her. "Mr. Fordham's flight is this way, Miss Vaughan." Amber sniffed the air. It smelled of jet fuel and money. Oh, the plane was magnificent, a gleaming white spear with a dark blue stripe and the stylized zesta of the Zenith Charter Group on the tail. This was Gregory's preferred airline, the most exclusive charter service in the world, dwarfing competitors like NetJets or FlexJet in sheer luxury. As she approached the steps, she saw the flight attendant at the door, Brenda, a woman with a perfectly coiffed bun and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. But Brenda wasn't looking at her. She was looking past her, at someone else who had just emerged from the lounge. Amber turned, and her perfect day soured. It was her, Helen Fordham, the wife. Amber's lip curled in a micro-sneer she quickly hid. She had only seen photos of Helen, and they were universally unflattering. The reality was somehow worse. While Amber was a blaze of crimson and gold, Helen was a study in beige. She wore a simple, oatmeal-colored cashmere cardigan, grey slacks that were functional rather than fashionable, and sensible-looking loafers. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple, severe bun, and her face was scrubbed clean of makeup. She looked less like the wife of a billionaire and more like his moderately paid accountant. Helen was carrying her own small, rolling suitcase, struggling slightly with the wheel as it caught on the tarmac. He brought her? Amber's mind reeled. He's bringing his dowdy little wife on our trip. This was supposed to be their anniversary, the anniversary of the day they'd met, while Helen was presumably at some pathetic charity luncheon. Rage, hot and sharp, flared in Amber's chest. But then, a new, delicious thought replaced it. This wasn't a problem. This was an opportunity, a chance to establish, once and for all, who the real woman in Gregory's life was. Amber glided forward, her heels clicking decisively. She stopped directly in front of Helen, forcing the older woman to halt. "Helen, isn't it?" Amber said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. She didn't offer a hand. Helen looked up, her eyes, a surprisingly clear, steady blue, meeting Amber's. "Yes, and you are Amber." It wasn't a question. "I am," Amber beamed, making a show of looking her up and down. "Oh, goodness! Did Gregory forget to tell you where you were going? We're headed to Mustique. It's very warm. That cardigan might be a bit much." Helen's expression didn't flicker. "I'll manage." "I'm just so surprised to see you," Amber continued, loud enough for the flight attendant to hear. "I thought you were more, I don't know, the stay-at-home and knit type. But good for you, getting out. It's so important for people in your position to see the world." She was baiting her, insulting her, calling her a charity case. The wife was just baggage Gregory was forced to tow along, and Amber was the main event. "It's kind of you to be so concerned with my comfort," Helen replied, her voice incredibly, frustratingly calm. She made a move to step around Amber. Amber blocked her path again, stepping closer, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. "Let's get one thing clear, Beige. You might have the ring for now, but I have the man. You're a guest on my trip. Try to remember that. Sit in the back, read your little book, and don't get in the way. Maybe Gregory will throw you a souvenir." Amber felt a thrill of victory. She had drawn the battle lines. She watched Helen's face, waiting for the tears, the anger, the satisfying crack in her composure. Helen simply held her gaze for a long, silent moment. The sound of the jet's auxiliary power unit filled the void. "Are you quite finished?" Helen asked, as if inquiring about the weather. Before Amber could retort, a booming voice cut across the tarmac. "There you are." Gregory Fordham strode into view, all teeth and testosterone, his phone already pressed to his ear. "No, you tell Johnson if he can't close by Friday. The whole deal is dead. I don't care. Dead!" He clicked the phone off and shoved it into his pocket, his smile returning instantly as he looked at Amber. "You look like $1 billion, baby," he said, kissing her fully on the lips, a deliberately theatrical gesture for Helen's benefit. He then turned to his wife. The smile vanished. "Helen." It was a cold, flat acknowledgement. "You're here. Good. Get on the plane. Don't cause a scene." "Hello, Gregory," Helen said, her voice still impossibly neutral. "Come on, Amber," Gregory said, slinging an arm around her waist and guiding her toward the stairs, leaving Helen standing alone on the tarmac. Amber looked back over her shoulder and gave Helen a triumphant, pitying smirk. Helen, she noted, hadn't moved. She just watched them, her face unreadable. As Amber stepped into the cabin, the scent of fresh roses and rich leather hit her. "Brenda," she trilled at the flight attendant, "I'll have a glass of the good champagne before we even take off, and make sure my guest," she gestured back toward Helen, "has plenty of water. She looks a bit dehydrated." Brenda, the flight attendant, smiled that plastic smile. "Of course, Miss Vaughan." Amber settled into the plush cream leather seat, sinking into it with a sigh of pure bliss. This was her world, and Helen was just a ghost haunting it. The cabin of the Gulfstream G700 was less an aircraft interior and more a penthouse apartment that defied gravity. Polished walnut, cream leather, and brushed gold fixtures gleamed under the soft, adjustable lighting. Amber kicked off her Louboutins and stretched her legs, accepting the fluted glass of champagne from Brenda. Helen boarded moments later, quietly stowing her own small bag in the overhead compartment, a task Gregory didn't even bother to watch, as he was already on his satellite phone again, shouting at someone named Johnson. "Helen," Gregory barked, holding a hand over the receiver. "Sit, over there." He pointed to a single seat at the very back of the main cabin, near the galley and the lavatories. It was clearly the least desirable seat. Amber watched, sipping her champagne. This was perfect. The wife, banished to the back. Helen, without a word of protest, walked to the back, sat down, and buckled her seatbelt. A moment later, she pulled a worn, dog-eared paperback from her handbag. "Pathetic," Amber muttered to Gregory, who had hung up his call. "What's that, baby?" he asked, loosening his tie. Her. Sitting back there like a servant. "Why did you even have to bring her?" "You said this was our trip." Amber pouted, running a manicured nail down his lapel. Gregory sighed, his eyes hard. "Shareholder business, Amber. Annoying but necessary. There's a spousal retreat on Mystique I'm supposed to attend with her for one of my bigger investors. She's just paperwork, a prop. The real trip," he said, kissing her neck, "is with you. You're the one in the master suite. She's in the guest cottage, if she's lucky." This mollified Amber. A prop. She liked that. She was the star. Helen was the background extra. The engine spooled up, and the G700 accelerated down the runway with a powerful, smooth surge. Within minutes they were airborne, climbing above the grey haze of New Jersey. Once they reached cruising altitude, the performance began. Amber was determined to make the next 5 hours as uncomfortable for Helen as possible, and as validating for herself as she could. She laughed loudly at Gregory's jokes. She fed him a chocolate-covered strawberry from the exquisite platter Brenda served. She draped her legs over his lap, whispering in his ear and kissing him deeply, all while knowing Helen was just a few rows back. She decided to take a series of selfies. She angled her phone, capturing the luxurious cabin, the champagne, and Gregory's adoring gaze. In one shot, she deliberately angled it to catch the background. There, just visible in the frame, was Helen, a blur of beige, engrossed in her book. Amber typed out a caption for her private Instagram story, reserved for her closest frenemies. "Finally heading to paradise with my man. Had to bring the excess baggage, LOL. Some people just don't know when their time is up." Winning. First class life. She hit send, feeling a rush of adrenaline. About an hour into the flight, Gregory fell asleep, his head tilted back, snoring softly. The cabin grew quiet, save for the hum of the engines. Amber was bored. She unbuckled and decided to stretch her legs and pay the prop a little visit. She sauntered to the back of the plane, pretending to be heading for the lavatory. Helen didn't look up from her book. "Enjoying the flight?" Amber asked, leaning against the bulkhead. Helen finished her page, then slowly looked up. "It's very smooth." "Zenith is the best," Amber said brightly. "Gregory, of course, only flies the best. He's one of their biggest clients. They treat him like royalty. We," she corrected herself, "get anything we want." Helen's gaze was unsettling. It wasn't fearful or angry. It was analytical, as if Amber were a bug under a microscope. "That must be very convenient for you," Helen finally said. "Oh, it is," Amber purred. "It's amazing what men will do for women they're actually passionate about. All this," she gestured around the cabin. "This is what real love looks like. Not whatever it is you have. A piece of paper? A shared Christmas card list? It's so quaint." Amber was trying to get a rise out of her, a single tear, a tremor in her voice. Anything. Helen just bookmarked her page. "Are you insecure, Amber?" Amber physically recoiled. "What? I have everything. Look at me. Look at you. Who on this plane looks insecure?" "People who are secure don't need to announce that they're winning," Helen said, her voice still quiet, but with a new, sharp edge that hadn't been there on the tarmac. "They just win. You seem to be working very hard to convince yourself of something." Amber's face flushed with anger. "You pathetic, dried up. You think you're wise? You're a joke. You're a doormat. Gregory is wiping his feet on you, and you're just sitting there, reading a book. And you are, what exactly? The new expensive welcome mat? Be careful, dear. Mats get replaced when they get dirty." "I am the future," Amber hissed, losing her composure, her voice rising above the engine hum. I'm the one he's building a life with. You're just the past he's too lazy to file for divorce from." The sleeping Gregory stirred at the front of the cabin. "Amber, what's going on back there?" Amber shot a look of pure hatred at Helen, then composed herself, strutting back to her seat. "Nothing, darling. Just getting a drink. The guest was just sleeping." She sat down, fuming. The little beige mouse had claws. The audacity of her! Amber stewed in her seat, her victory on the tarmac now feeling hollow. She needed to regain control. She needed to prove, to Helen and to Gregory, who was really in charge, and she knew just how to do it. For the next 2 hours, Amber sulked. She drank 2 more glasses of champagne, the bubbles doing little to soothe the simmering indignation. The nerve of that woman! "Mats get replaced." Amber watched the crew. There were 2 attendants in the main cabin, Brenda and a younger man named Leo. They were ghosts in sharp uniforms, efficient, polite, and invisible. They refilled Amber's glass without being asked. They brought Gregory a warm towel the moment he woke up. They were, in short, perfect service staff. But Amber started to notice something. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in their behavior. When Amber had snapped her fingers for a refill, a habit she'd picked up, believing it made her look commanding. Brenda's smile had tightened for a fraction of a second before she'd complied. "Right away, Ms. Vaughan." When Gregory had tossed his used napkin onto the floor, Leo had picked it up with a smile, but his eyes were flat. Their deference was professional, but it felt brittle, strained. Then Amber watched as Brenda approached Helen's seat in the back. Amber had to crane her neck to see. Brenda leaned down, not with the efficient, curt posture she used for Amber, but with a genuine, gentle incline. "Ms. H," Brenda said, her voice too low for Amber to hear the words, but the tone was entirely different. It was soft, respectful. Amber saw Helen smile, a small, genuine smile, and nod, gesturing to her empty water glass. Brenda returned a moment later, not with a standard plastic bottle, but with a tall glass of what looked like sparkling water with a twist of lime, served on a small, linen-wrapped tray. Amber's eyes narrowed. "Miss H? What kind of nickname was that?" It sounded familiar. Familiar and deferential. Not the kind of pitying nickname you give the sad wife. It sounded like respect. Amber dismissed it. They probably just feel sorry for her. The poor, cheated-on wife. They're giving her the pity treatment. The thought made her feel superior again. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Gregory was back on his phone, his voice tense. "I don't care what the margin call is. Move the funds from the Singapore account. Just handle it, damn it." He looked stressed, dark circles under his eyes that his tan couldn't hide. "Trouble in paradise, darling?" Amber asked, running her foot up his leg. "Nothing you need to worry about, baby," he said, patting her knee distractedly. "Just market fluctuations." He didn't seem like the confident shark she'd met. He seemed desperate. Amber turned her attention back to the cabin crew. She decided to test a theory. She pressed the call button. Leo appeared instantly. "Yes, Miss Vaughan?" "I'm cold," Amber announced. "The air is too high. Turn it up." "Certainly, Miss Vaughan. I'll adjust the cabin temperature immediately." He disappeared toward the cockpit. A few minutes later, Amber didn't feel any warmer. If anything, the air felt a tiny bit cooler. She fumed. She was being ignored. She pressed the button again, harder this time. Brenda appeared. "Is there a problem, Miss Vaughan?" "I told him," Amber snapped, "that I am cold. It's freezing in here. I want a blanket, a thick one, and I want the heat turned up. Now." Brenda's professional smile remained plastered on. "Miss Vaughan, The cabin temperature is set for optimal comfort. I'd be happy to bring you a pashmina. I don't want a pashmina. I want the heat turned up. I'm afraid any significant change to the cabin temperature requires me to check with all our guests first, as it can affect cabin pressure and comfort, Brenda said smoothly. Then check. Amber gestured to Gregory, who was rubbing his temples, and then back to Helen. It's just us. Go ask her. Brenda nodded. Thank you, Miss Vaughan. I will do just that. Brenda didn't walk to Gregory. She didn't walk to the thermostat. She walked directly to the back of the plane, to Helen's seat. Again, she leaned in. Amber watched intently. This was not the behavior of an attendant asking a prop for permission. This was the behavior of an attendant asking a host. Brenda spoke to Helen for a long moment. Helen listened, then shook her head, saying something brief in reply. Brenda returned to Amber's seat. Her smile was still in place, but it looked like it had been carved from ice. My apologies, Miss Vaughan, Brenda said, her voice crisp. We are unable to adjust the cabin temperature at this time. However, she produced a thick cashmere throw, the color of clotted cream. I have this for you. It's brand new. Amber snatched the blanket. This is ridiculous. Gregory, are you hearing this? They're refusing to turn up the heat. Gregory, deep in a financial report on his laptop, just waved a hand. Just take the blanket, Amber. Stop making a fuss. Amber shrank back, humiliated. Stop making a fuss? He was taking their side over hers? Over the heat? She wrapped the blanket around herself, her face burning with a mixture of anger and a new, unfamiliar feeling. Confusion. Something was wrong. The dynamic was off. The staff was being polite, but they were defying her. And they were, in some strange, unspoken way, reporting to the beige mouse in the back. Amber looked back again. Helen had put her book down. She was staring out the window at the endless blue of the Atlantic. Her profile was calm, strong, and completely untroubled. For the first time, Amber felt a genuine prickle of fear. She'd assumed she was the queen in this equation. But what if she had fundamentally misunderstood the entire game? The incident with the thermostat left a bitter taste in Amber's mouth. She felt a desperate need to reassert her dominance, to prove that her initial assessment was correct. She was the A-plot. Helen was the B-plot. She needed a grand gesture, a display of power that the crew, and Helen, could not mistake. She remembered Gregory boasting about the Zenith Charter Group's wine cellar. He'd claimed they could source anything for their top clients, even mid-flight. "Brenda!" Amber called, her voice sharp. Brenda, who was clearing Gregory's empty coffee cup, turned. "Yes, Miss Vaughan. I've decided I want to celebrate. We're almost to Mustik. Gregory, darling," she cooed. "We should have a proper toast." Gregory, who had just closed his laptop with a stressed sigh, looked grateful for the distraction. "Good idea, baby. Whatever you want." Amber turned back to Brenda, a sly, victorious smile on her face. "I want the 1998 Dom Perignon Rosé Gold. I know you have it. Gregory has had it on this plane before." This was her checkmate. The 98 Rosé Gold was a legendary, ultra-rare vintage, costing tens of thousands of dollars a bottle. Ordering it was not a request. It was a declaration of status. It was the kind of thing only a king like Gregory could command. Brenda's professional smile didn't just tighten. It vanished. For a split second, she looked startled. Then, the mask was back. "The 1998 Dom Perignon Rosé Gold," Brenda repeated slowly, as if committing it to memory. "An excellent choice, Miss Vaughan. Please, wait one moment." She disappeared into the galley. Amber sat back, her smirk returning. There. Let the mouse in the back hear that. She was already picturing the magnificent, gold-plated bottle, the pop of the cork, the look of envy on Helen's face. Gregory seemed to relax. Now that's what I'm talking about. Good call, Amber. A minute passed. Then 2. Amber's smirk began to fade. What was taking so long? Was she arguing with the pilot about it? Brenda re-emerged from the galley. She was empty-handed. Miss Vaughan, Brenda began, her voice a low, formal monotone. I'm afraid the 1998 Dom Perignon Rosé Gold is not available for service. Amber's blood ran cold, then hot. Not available? What do you mean, not available? I just told you. Gregory has it all the time. My apologies, but that specific bottle is part of a private manifest. It is allocated. Allocated? Allocated to who? Amber demanded, her voice rising to a shriek. We are the only passengers. Are you telling me the pilots are drinking it? Gregory, seeing his prize and his status slipping away, sat up straight. His titan of industry voice returned. Now listen here, Brenda. I am paying over $100,000 for this flight. If my guest wants that champagne, she gets that champagne. I don't care what manifest it's on. Go and get it. That's an order. He said it with a finality that usually made assistants and subordinates scurry. Brenda didn't scurry. She stood her ground, her hands clasped in front of her. Sir, she said, addressing Gregory directly, her voice respectful but iron firm. I cannot. That bottle was provisioned by special request by the owner. It is not part of the standard client cellar. It is from the owner's personal stock, and it is reserved. Amber burst into a high, hysterical laugh. The owner? You think the owner is on this flight? What is he hiding in the cockpit? Gregory looked furious. This is an outrage. I am Gregory Fordham. I spend millions with this company. I am your owner, for all intents and purposes. Who the hell is on this plane more important than me? Brenda's gaze was steady. She didn't flinch. I am very sorry, Mr. Fordham, but my instructions are clear. The owner's private stock is not available. This is the worst service I have ever had, Amber yelled, slamming her hand on the armrest. I'm going to have you fired. I'm going to tell Gregory to buy this entire pathetic airline and fire every single one of you. Amber, shut up, Gregory snapped, his face pale. He knew he'd been rebuffed, and it made him look weak. He turned back to Brenda. This is unacceptable. Get your manager. I am the lead flight coordinator, sir. There is no one else to speak to, Brenda said. I can offer you our Dom Perignon 2012, which is also excellent. I don't want the 2012, Amber cried, her face blotchy with rage. I want the 98. I want what I asked for. And you can't have it. The voice was not Brenda's. It was quiet. It was clear. And it came from the back of the plane. Amber, Gregory, and Brenda all turned. Helen Fordham had put her book down in her lap. She was looking at them, her expression no longer passive or analytical. It was one of mild annoyance, as if they were toddlers throwing a tantrum. What did you say? Amber whispered, her throat suddenly dry. Helen unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up. And for the first time, Amber noticed she wasn't dowdy. The cashmere, she now saw, was Loro Piana. The simple loafers were handcrafted by Brunello Cucinelli. The beige outfit probably cost more than Amber's entire crimson ensemble. Helen walked slowly up the aisle, her movements fluid and sure-footed, despite the slight hum of the aircraft. She stopped next to Brenda, standing shoulder to shoulder with the flight attendant. She looked at Amber, then at her husband. I said, Helen repeated, her voice perfectly modulated, you can't have it. Because, as Brenda correctly stated, it's mine. The silence in the cabin was absolute, broken only by the faint whistle of air passing over the wings. Gregory stared, his mouth slightly open. "Helen, what? What are you talking about? It's yours? Did you steal it from the galley?" Amber let out a choked sound, a cross between a laugh and a gasp. "Oh my God! Are you a klepto? You're stealing champagne now. This is a new low, even for you." Helen simply raised an eyebrow. She didn't look at Amber. She didn't even look at Gregory. She looked at Brenda. "Brenda," Helen said, her voice warm, "you've handled this beautifully. But I believe you can stop referring to me as Ms. H now. It was a lovely code. But I think the game is up." Brenda's icy, professional mask melted away, replaced by a look of profound, genuine respect. "Yes, Mrs. Fordham. My apologies. I was just trying to maintain protocol as you requested." "You did perfectly," Helen said. She then turned her steady, blue-eyed gaze back to her husband. "Gregory," she said, and the name sounded new on her tongue. It wasn't the whisper of a wife. It was the sharp, clear pronouncement of a CEO. "You've been flying with Zenith Charter Group for 3 years. You've spent, as you correctly noted, millions of dollars. And in all that time, you never once bothered to ask what the Z stood for? Or the H in our parent company, H Group Global?" Gregory's face was ashen. "What? What are you talking about?" "H Group. That's holdings. H Group Holdings." "No, Gregory," Helen said softly. "It's not. H Group was founded by my mother, Helena. And Zenith? That was my pet project. My father always loved the stars. The zenith is the highest point. I founded this airline 10 years ago, before I even met you, as a small tribute to him." She ran a hand along the polished walnut bulkhead. "I designed this very interior. I chose the leather. I selected the routes. And I personally curate the owner's private wine list." She looked at Amber, whose own face had gone from crimson rage to a waxy chalk white. "The 1998 Dom Perignon Rosé Gold," Helen said, "was a gift from my father the day we secured our first G5. There is exactly 1 bottle on this plane, and I assure you, you are not drinking it." Amber sank back into her seat, her entire body numb. No, that's not possible. You're nothing. You're a housewife. You go to garden clubs." "Yes," Helen agreed. "I do. I am the head of the New York Botanical Gardens Endowment Fund. I'm also on the board of the Met, and I am the sole 100% owner of Zenith Charter Group and its parent company, H Group Global, which, among other things, owns the building your office is in, Gregory." Gregory finally found his voice. It was a strangled whisper. Helen, why didn't I know? You always said you were just in philanthropy." "You never asked," Helen said, a deep, profound sadness entering her voice for the first time. "You met me at a charity ball. You saw my quiet clothes. You saw my family's old name, and you assumed I was just old money. You assumed I was a relic, a simple, quiet prop you could use to look respectable, while you behaved like this." She gestured from Amber to Gregory. Gregory was sputtering, his mind visibly racing, trying to recalculate decades of assumptions. "Helen, baby, listen to me. This, he gestured wildly at Amber. "This is nothing. This is a mistake, a diversion. You're my wife. I love you." Amber felt like she'd been slapped. "What? Gregory, you told me I was your life. You told me she was the mistake." Gregory ignored her, his eyes fixed on Helen, his face a mask of sweating, desperate panic. "Helen, please. We can sort this out. When we land, we'll send her," he spat the word, "back. We'll go to the resort. Just us. We'll talk." Helen watched him grovel. The shark had become a minnow, flopping on the deck. "No, Gregory, I don't think we will," Helen said. "You see, I've known about Amber for 6 months. I've known about the Singapore accounts for a year. I've known about the margin calls and the fact that you've been desperately and illegally trying to leverage my personal assets you still don't have access to cover your own catastrophic business failures." She walked over to the galley. Brenda, anticipating, had the 98 rosé gold waiting. It was, as Amber had noted, in a stunning gold-plated bottle. Helen took a clean flute from Brenda. "Thank you, Brenda. I think I will have that glass now." Brenda smiled. "My pleasure, Madame Chairman." Helen turned back to the frozen duo. The pop of the cork was the loudest sound Amber had ever heard. Helen poured a glass of the pale, bubbling pink champagne. "You see, Gregory," Helen said, taking a delicate sip, "this trip was shareholder business. I am the main shareholder of your company, or I was. As of 9 a.m. this morning, my board invoked the morality clause in your contract and voted for your removal. The spousal retreat on Mustique was a fiction, a way to get you and your excess baggage on my plane in international airspace where you couldn't cause a scene." She looked at Amber. "You're right about one thing. You are on this trip as a witness." Gregory Fordham's face went through a rapid, grotesque series of transformations, from ashen panic to purple rage, and finally, to a sickly, defeated green. You can't," he stammered, his bravado utterly shattered. My company? I built that from nothing." "You built it," Helen corrected, "with a $50 million seed loan from H Group Global, a loan which, I might add, is now in default. You haven't built anything in a decade, Gregory. You've just been spending on parties, on apartments you don't own, on her." Amber, who had been frozen in a state of shock, suddenly found her voice. It was high and thin. "Me? What about me? Gregory, tell her you love me. Tell her she's lying." Gregory didn't even look at her. His entire universe had collapsed, and his eyes were fixed on the only person who mattered, his wife. "Helen, please," he begged, actually getting up from his seat and moving to kneel in the aisle beside her. "Helen, I'm so sorry. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. You are everything. She's a cheap, gold-digging. She means nothing. I'll end it. Right now. I'll tell her to get off the plane. We can fix this. I can fix this." Amber felt the last of the air leave her lungs. She was the one being thrown away. She was the excess baggage. "Get off me, Gregory," Helen said, stepping back from his grasping hands with revulsion. "It's too late for that. It's been too late for a very long time. Did you really think I was that quiet? That simple? That dowdy?" She was using Amber's insults. "I let you think that," Helen continued, her voice like ice. "I let you think I was happily knitting and gardening while you played the big, important man. It was a test of your character. And you have failed, Gregory. You haven't just failed. You have failed so spectacularly that you will be a case study in business schools for decades." She took another sip of her champagne. "While you were buying Prada," she glanced at Amber's dress, "and leveraging company assets for your little side piece, I was quietly moving. Every asset you thought you had access to was systematically insulated. The accounts you've been draining, they were decoys I set up 6 months ago filled with just enough money to keep you busy and to provide a very clear, very damning paper trail of embezzlement for the SEC. The real money, my father's money, my mother's money, has been in a blind trust since the day we married. A trust, I might add, that you have no legal claim to, especially not after, well, all of this. Gregory had crawled back to his seat. He was breathing heavily. You trapped me." "No," Helen said. "You built the cage, Gregory. I just let you lock yourself inside it." Suddenly, Amber, in a fit of pure, unadulterated panic, realized her own position. Her billionaire boyfriend wasn't just not a billionaire. He was broke. He was a criminal. And she had just spent 5 hours insulting the actual billionaire. "Wait! Wait!" Amber shrieked, scrambling up. This isn't my fault. He told me you were nothing. He lied to me. I'm a victim here too." She looked at Helen, her eyes wide with desperation. "Please, I didn't know. I would never. I mean, you're amazing. What you did, it's genius. We should be friends." Helen looked at Amber, and for the first time, Amber saw what she had mistaken for quiet and beige. It wasn't weakness. It was a stillness, a deep, cold, and absolute power. "Friends?" Helen replied, a small, mirthless smile playing on her lips. "I don't think so. You're not a victim, Amber. You're a co-conspirator. You knew he was a married man. You gleefully participated in his humiliation of me. You drank his champagne, you wore his clothes, and you sat in my plane, insulting me. You didn't care about the right or wrong of it. You only cared that you were winning. And now you've lost." The intercom crackled. It wasn't the pilot's voice. It was Brenda's. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent. However, there has been a change in our flight plan. We will not be landing in Mustique. We will be landing at Westchester County Airport in White Plains, New York. We will be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. Amber's head snapped to the window. The endless blue ocean was gone. Below them, shrouded in the late afternoon haze, was the distinct shoreline of the Long Island Sound. They weren't in the Caribbean. They had just flown in a large, pointless circle. "What? New York?" Amber shrieked. "We're back in New York. We didn't go anywhere." "Oh, we went somewhere," Helen said, returning to her seat, her original seat in the back. "We flew out over international waters, far enough for my legal team to file the injunctions, freeze your accounts, and remove you from the company board without you being able to interfere. And now, we're home." Gregory was rocking back and forth, muttering to himself. "My office, the building, oh God, the funds, Johnson. I have to call Johnson." He fumbled for his satellite phone. "I wouldn't bother," Helen called from the back. "Mr. Johnson has been cooperating with my forensic accounting team for 3 weeks. He's the one who gave us the final piece of evidence. He's probably signing a witness protection agreement as we speak." Gregory's hand froze. He looked at the phone in his hand as if it were a snake. His entire world, his empire, his mistress, his wife, all of it, had been an illusion, orchestrated by the one person he had never, ever taken seriously. The descent was heavy with a silence, thicker than the clouds they were passing through. The luxurious cabin, which had so recently been Amber's stage for triumph, had become a soundproofed tomb. Every faint creak of the fuselage, every subtle shift in the engine's whine, felt magnified, echoing in the dead air between the 3 passengers. Amber sat rigid, her hands clamped so tightly on the cream leather armrests that her knuckles were white. Her gaze was fixed on the bulkhead in front of her, but she saw nothing. Her mind was a frantic blur of calculations, a desperate search for an angle, an escape, a way to rewind time. But there was none. She was trapped at 40,000 feet with the woman she had mocked and the man who had just proven to be a hollow shell. Gregory was in a worse state. He was completely catatonic. His face, which had cycled through panic and rage, had settled into a mask of waxy, sweaty ruin. He stared at his own reflection in the polished walnut table, his breathing shallow. He was a man who had been playing chess, only to find out his opponent was playing a different game entirely, one she had already won before he even sat down. And in the back, Helen had resumed reading her paperback book. The sight of it was the most terrifying thing Amber had ever witnessed. She was calmly turning pages, as if she were on a commuter train, not concluding a hostile takeover of her husband's life in mid-air. The Gulfstream G700 touched down on the runway at Westchester County Airport with a barely perceptible bump. The landing was, as always, impossibly smooth, but the thud of the wheels on the tarmac felt like a gavel striking, a final judgment. They weren't in Mustique. They weren't in paradise. They were back in New York, on a grey, overcast afternoon. The plane didn't taxi to the sleek, glass-walled private terminal where Amber had boarded, a place humming with quiet prestige and waiting limousines. Instead, it rolled, and kept rolling, to a remote, isolated part of the airfield. Amber finally forced her head to turn to the window. She saw no plush lounges, only a chain-link fence, a small, featureless utility building, and a vast, empty stretch of grey concrete. The engine spooled down. The sudden, encompassing silence was louder than any of Gregory's rants had been. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged off. "Thank you for flying Zenith Charter Group." Brenda's voice came over the intercom, her tone once again bright and professional, as if this were the most normal flight in the world. "The local time is 4:52 p.m. Please remain seated until the cabin door is open." In the back, Helen placed her bookmark, a simple leather strip, into her book and closed it. She stood, smoothing her Loro Piana cardigan, her movements fluid and unhurried. She picked up her small, simple handbag. Amber finally realized the truth. Helen hadn't been struggling with a rolling suitcase on the tarmac. She'd been pretending to. The bag had been a prop, a piece of her dowdy wife costume, likely left in the lounge. The cabin door opened. The cold, damp air of a New York autumn afternoon rushed in, displacing the climate-controlled luxury. It didn't reveal a red carpet. It revealed a set of stark, metal stairs, the grey tarmac, and two men in dark, conservative suits. They looked like lawyers, or perhaps something more. They were not smiling. Standing a few feet behind them, his presence an unstated threat, was a uniformed officer from the Westchester County Police. Helen walked to the front of the plane. She passed Gregory's seat. He didn't look up, not even when her shadow fell across him. She paused at Amber's row. Amber looked up, her face a ruin. Her perfectly applied makeup was now a blotchy, tear-streaked mess. Her crimson dress felt garish and cheap. What's going to happen to me?" Amber whispered, the words catching in her dry throat. It was the plea of a child, a final, desperate appeal to the very woman she had tried to destroy. Helen looked down at her. Her expression was not one of anger or even triumph. It was one of cool, detached pity, the look one might give a particularly foolish insect. "That, Amber, is no longer my concern," Helen said, her voice quiet, but carrying utter finality. "You saw this as a game of winning, and you attached yourself to the man you thought was the winner. You hitched your wagon to a falling star. My advice, for what it's worth? Next time, you should have brought your own parachute." She then turned to Gregory. "Gregory." He flinched, a small, pathetic motion. He finally looked at her, his eyes hollow and pleading. My lawyers will be serving you at... Well, I suppose they'll serve you at the police station. They will be handling the divorce and the criminal complaint for embezzlement and wire fraud. I have been advised, for legal reasons, not to speak to you again. Goodbye." Helen turned and walked to the open door, a picture of calm control. She nodded to the men in suits who parted for her like the sea. "Ms. H," one of them said, his voice low and respectful. "The car is ready." "Thank you, Robert," she replied. She walked down the steps, her sensible loafers making a soft, firm sound on the metal. She never once looked back. A black, unassuming Mercedes S-Class, a car that, unlike Amber's rented Ferraris, whispered power rather than screaming for attention, pulled up. Robert opened the door for her. She got in, and the car drove away, disappearing around the side of a hangar. Back on the plane, the two men in suits boarded, their large frames filling the doorway, blocking the light. The uniformed officer remained at the bottom of the steps. "Mr. Gregory Fordham?" the taller one asked. It was not a question. Gregory just nodded, a broken man, his head sinking to his chest. "You need to come with us. We have a warrant for your arrest on several counts of wire fraud and embezzlement. Please stand." Gregory stood, but he seemed to be moving through water. He was stumbling, his legs weak. The officer stepped up into the cabin, holding a pair of handcuffs. Amber watched, frozen, as the officer instructed Gregory to turn around. The man she had called her Titan, her king, the shark she had so admired, put his hands behind his back without a word. The sharp, metallic, click, click, click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the only sound. They led him down the aisle, his expensive Xenia suit now hopelessly rumpled, his head bowed in utter defeat. And then he was gone. Amber was alone in the cabin with Brenda. The silence stretched. Brenda began to walk through the cabin, collecting the empty champagne flutes, her expression perfectly neutral. "Well," Amber said, her voice shaking as she tried to muster a final shred of dignity. I guess I'll just call an Uber." She reached for her phone, a desperate lunge for her last connection to the world. Brenda stopped her tidying and looked at her. Her professional smile was gone, and her eyes were as cold and grey as the tarmac outside. "I'm afraid not, Miss Vaughan," Brenda said, her voice stripped of all pretense of service. "Your name was on the flight manifest as a guest of Mr. Fordham. As he has just been arrested, and his account with Zenith Charter Group is permanently closed, effective immediately. You are now considered an unauthorized passenger." An unauthorized passenger," Amber repeated, the words feeling like a slap. "But I have to get home. You can't just leave me here." "I'm sure you do," Brenda said, "but you will not be leaving through the private terminal. That access is reserved for our clients. You'll be escorted by airport security through the main TSA checkpoint. From there, you're on your own." Brenda gestured to the open door, where a different, disgruntled-looking airport security guard was now waiting. Expulsion. This was the final humiliation. She wasn't just being kicked out of the plane, she was being kicked out of the world she had tried so hard to infiltrate. Amber looked around the cabin one last time, at the polished walnut, the plush seats, the empty flutes. This had been her dream, her golden cage, and the door had just been slammed shut, with her on the wrong side. Numbly, she picked up her Chanel bag, her only remaining prize. It suddenly felt heavy, a gaudy-looking prop from a play that had just ended. She walked, her head down, out of the aircraft, the cold air hitting her face. The security guard wordlessly pointed her toward a distant, staff-only door on the side of the main terminal. It was a long, humiliating walk across the open tarmac. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked at it, desperate for any lifeline, any friend. It was an alert from her Instagram. The story she had posted hours ago, the one of her and Gregory, the one calling Helen excess baggage, was suddenly, inexplicably, being flooded with comments. She didn't know how, but the story was out. OMG, do you know who his wife is? This aged so badly. LMAO, she owns the plane. Karma by Amber, a Zenith charter. Boss move. Her world had ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, satisfied click of a car door as the quiet wife drove away. And just like that, the quiet wife showed that true power doesn't need to be loud. Helen walked away with her dignity, her company, and her freedom, while Amber and Gregory were left with nothing but the consequences of their own actions. What do you think of Helen's ultimate power move? Have you ever seen karma delivered so perfectly? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice and unexpected twists, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama every single week. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you in the next story.
Elira hit the pavement with a bone-jarring crash, gravel biting into her skin like 1,000 tiny blades. Pain surged violently through her body as blood seeped from torn flesh, staining her trembling fingers crimson. She gasped desperately for air, clutching her swollen belly as panic gripped her heart. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for the innocent life inside her. Through blurred vision, she saw the ruthless glint of luxury taillights vanishing into the blackness. Rykar's gleaming sports car mercilessly speeding away, with Celeste's mocking laughter trailing cruelly behind. He knew she was pregnant. He had seen the joy in her eyes just hours ago, yet his eyes had hardened like cold steel as he shoved her onto the road without hesitation. The man she trusted, the man she loved, had discarded her like worthless garbage. Every whispered promise, every tender caress suddenly felt like venomous lies. Rage and betrayal twisted violently within her, matching the agony of her physical wounds. Lying there, paralyzed by pain and shock, Elira reached out a shaky hand, her voice cracking in a pitiful cry for help. But the deserted road echoed only silence. As darkness began to pull her under, she swore to herself, if she survived this night, she would ensure that Rykar paid dearly for every bruise, every tear, every drop of blood he'd cause. If this dramatic opening has you hooked, comment 1 to show your support for Elira's fight, or 2 if you think she needs to find peace instead. And don't forget to tell me where you're following this story from. Elira awoke in a small-town clinic, her eyelids fluttering under glaring fluorescent lights. Every muscle felt bruised, every breath a reminder of her bruised ribcage. The nurse's gentle voice broke through her daze, informing her that her baby was still holding on, alive, albeit weak. Relief mingled with heartbreak, and for a moment, she clutched her belly as if apologizing for exposing the child to such violence. When her thoughts cleared, she remembered the betrayal in sharp detail. It wasn't just the throw onto the roadside. It was the months of deception leading up to it. The hush in Celeste's voice whenever Elira entered the room. The extravagant gifts Rykar would shower on Elira to keep her from asking questions. The final straw had been discovering him on the anniversary night she'd planned so carefully. Locked in a tender embrace with Celeste in the very lake house Elira had decorated with fairy lights and baby shoes. She had stood outside, the gift for Rykar cradled in her trembling arms, watching the man she loved betray her with someone who used to be her closest confidant. Only a day earlier, Elira would have given everything for him. She had believed that their marriage, built on promise and hope, could endure the scorn of his high society circle. She had endured icy receptions, condescending smiles, and outright insults from his wealthy friends who considered her a nobody. Yet she'd held her head high, certain her devotion and sincerity would triumph. But when Celeste appeared, wearing the same dress Elira had packed for herself, something in her shattered irreparably. Now, as she lay staring at the rough plaster ceiling, she felt not sadness, but a cold seed of rage starting to blossom. A nurse quietly entered and handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a photograph. Rykar and Celeste, arms entwined, triumphant grins across their faces. On Celeste's hand, Alira recognized a familiar ring, the heirloom from her deceased grandmother that Rykar had sworn would forever symbolize his love for Alira. Her hand trembled, but no tears came. Instead, she felt a silent vow coil in her chest. She was done pleading for love. It was time to fight back. Been a while since the story began. Are you rooting for Alira to seek justice? Tap 1 if yes, or 2 if you're unsure. I'd love to hear your stance. Discharged from the clinic, Alira walked out into the crisp morning air with a single-minded focus. She would not vanish quietly. The world might have whispered that she was missing or presumed dead, but she was very much alive. At first, the doctors insisted she remain under observation, wary of the trauma she'd sustained. But Alira's steely determination unsettled them into compliance. She left wearing borrowed clothes and a bandage on her bruised arm, her gaze distant and unreadable. She made her way to the modest legal office of Mr. Faraday, a friend of her late father. The office was small and dusty, a far cry from the marble pillars and art-adorned halls of Rykar's empire. As Alira waited in the reception area, she noticed the difference immediately. Here, people smiled kindly, offered tea, and treated her as a person rather than a disposable accessory. Mr. Faraday emerged, his lined face carrying decades of compassion. He handed Alira a set of documents that made her heart pound, her father's hidden trust fund. All her life, Alira had believed her father left her little more than sentimental memories, photographs, a few personal belongings, and lessons about kindness. But now she learned he'd carefully stashed away a fortune intended to secure her future, protected by ironclad legal clauses. The pages also revealed something devastating. Rykar had known about this fund from the start. It dawned on her that his initial flattery and whirlwind romance might have all been part of a grand scheme to access her hidden wealth. She felt a nauseating sense of betrayal. Before leaving, she glimpsed a small photograph pinned to Mr. Faraday's old corkboard. It was of her, years ago, standing next to her father at a charity event. She remembered that day, how Rykar's name had never once come up, how she had felt safe and loved in her father's presence. Now Rykar's presence polluted every corner of her life. With a trembling hand, she clutched the documents to her chest and made a silent promise to her father's memory. She would not be a victim again. She would reclaim what was rightfully hers and ruin anyone who tried to take it. Let me pause the story here. Comment 1 if you think Alira's father's foresight will help her triumph, or 2 if you predict more heartbreak first. Your feedback keeps this journey alive. Alira's next stop took her to an unmarked office on the outskirts of the city, a place recommended by Mr. Faraday for those needing discreet investigative work. Seated behind a battered wooden desk was a private investigator named Garrett, a man whose features bore the weariness of someone who had seen every imaginable brand of human deceit. He listened quietly as Alira laid out her story, the betrayal, the suspicious timing of her marriage, the sudden cruelty culminating in her being thrown onto the road while pregnant. When she handed over some documents that hinted at Rykar's financial misconduct, Garrett's eyebrows rose. He's more cunning than most, the investigator murmured, scanning each page with razor-sharp attention. But no one's untouchable, not with the right evidence. Over the following week, Garrett uncovered a digital labyrinth, forged signatures, offshore accounts in the Caymans, shell corporations that siphoned funds from Alira's inherited trust into secret ledgers bearing Rykar's name. Among those records lurked suspicious references to Celeste, proof she too was knee-deep in the conspiracy. Yet the deeper Alira dug, the more she realized that betrayal had not only come from Rykar. An old photo in Garrett's files showed Celeste in Alira's childhood home, hugging her close and beaming at some birthday party years ago. Celeste had grown up practically as a sister to Alira. They'd shared diaries, aspirations, heartbreaks, everything. Now Celeste was the mistress who laughed as Alira lay battered on the roadside. The cruelty stabbed deeper than any physical wound, and it fueled Alira's resolve. On a chilly evening, after the lights in Garrett's office went dim, Alira stayed behind, reviewing each piece of incriminating evidence, a solemn hush enveloping her. With every signed affidavit, bank transaction, and stealth photograph, She constructed a legal dagger aimed straight at Rikar's empire. She needed no sensational headlines or teary interviews. She wanted a single decisive blow that would leave him with nothing, just as he had left her with nothing. Standing under the flicker of a single desk lamp, Elora felt oddly calm. This was no longer about love or heartbreak. This was about justice, redemption, and reclaiming her life from those who had treated it so callously. How are you finding the pace? If you're fully invested in Elira's quest, drop a 1. If you'd prefer more backstory, drop a 2. We value your insight. While Elira meticulously planned her next move, Rykar was busy watching his world begin to crack. He was in a plush boardroom high above the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing gleaming skyscrapers. One moment, he was sealing a new investment deal. The next, his phone buzzed with urgent texts from his finance team. Funds were getting locked, transactions flagged, and some investor from overseas had pulled out after suspicious revelations. Humim. The board members stared at him, perplexed, as if expecting a confident explanation. Celeste sat at the far end of the room, wearing a champagne-colored dress that matched Rykar's golden tie. She had grown accustomed to the applause, the endless compliments, and the swirl of riches Rykar had draped around her. So when whispers of financial trouble spread, she shot Rykar a questioning glare, her expression wavering between concern and simmering anger. After all, she had sacrificed her longtime friendship with Elira and her own sense of decency to be at his side. Now it looked like the golden goose might be losing its feathers. Rykar assured everyone there was a slight technical issue, but inside his stomach twisted with dread. He had grown comfortable in his illusion of invincibility, the hush money for bribed officials, the secret slush funds, the hush-hush property deals. He'd orchestrated them all flawlessly, but it now felt as though a ghost from his past was sabotaging every carefully laid plan. That ghost was Elira, of course, though Rykar had no inkling she'd survive the fall. He believed she'd either fled in shame or was too broken to stand against him. He never anticipated her intelligence, her father's hidden trust, or the private investigator's meticulous skill. Like a chess grandmaster, Elira was cornering him piece by piece, content with letting him squirm, the walls closing in inch by inch. On the drive home from the boardroom, Celeste confronted Rykar in the back of his limousine, demanding to know what was going on. Frustration etched into every syllable of her voice. Yet Rykar brushed her off with an insincere half-smile, promising he would fix everything. If only he knew the unstoppable force brewing in Elira's mind. Her final checkmate was fast approaching. Give me a quick pulse check. Type 1 if you're eager to see Rykar face real consequences, or 2 if you think Celeste might turn on him. Share your thoughts. Far from the glare of the city lights, Elira found unexpected solace in a quiet farmhouse owned by Trent, the same elderly man who had rescued her on the roadside. Once the bandages were removed and the bruises on her knees began to fade, she used this rustic retreat to strategize. Evenings by the crackling fireplace were spent cross-referencing Garrett's data, Mr. Faraday's legal counsel, and the silent knowledge that Rykar believed her out of the picture. Late at night, she'd stand on the porch staring at a sky ablaze with stars, remembering the nights she once spent in Rykar's penthouse, lulled by the hum of air conditioning and the city's neon glow. Back then, she was enthralled by the glitz and promise of wealth. Now, as her unborn child stirred in her womb, she realized she preferred the honest hush of farmland nights to any of that hollow grandeur. A key part of her plan required alliances, and one particular name rose to the surface: Malcolm. He was a fierce business rival of Rykar, a shark in his own right, but rumored to value fairness above exploitation. Elira loathed dealing with another power player, but she recognized the potential synergy. Malcolm might not be a saint, yet he despised Rykar for overshadowing him in recent ventures. If she showed him the evidence of Rykar's corruption, he might eagerly help bury her husband's empire, especially if there was something in it for him. Trent quietly supported Elira's every move. He rarely pried into her motivations, simply reminding her to find peace whenever she could. Revenge, he cautioned, can turn you bitter, even if it's deserved. Don't forget to live for yourself and your child. Elira thanked him with a weary half-smile, acknowledging the wisdom, but knowing she couldn't rest until Rykar was held accountable. Before the final night of her stay, Alira wrote a list of demands, a strategy to funnel select evidence to regulators at just the right moment. She had no intention of letting Rykar slip away or buy his innocence. She needed to ensure the truth exploded so spectacularly that it would destroy any chance of him regaining the position he so callously abused. Still with me? If this tension has you hooked, give me a 1. If you're craving a calm moment, type 2. Your feedback shapes this narrative. Celeste's descent began with a single folder she wasn't meant to see. It sat half open on Rykar's mahogany desk. Notarized deeds, secret accounts, even mention of a villa in southern Italy meant for private getaways. She had assumed these luxuries would be shared between them. Wasn't that part of the grand promise when she risked everything to be at his side? But one name on those documents stopped her cold. A mysterious woman listed as co-owner, along with a child's name that clearly wasn't hers. At first, Celeste told herself it had to be old paperwork, perhaps from a distant relative or business arrangement. Yet a creeping suspicion gnawed at her. Late that night, she snuck back into the study and pored over every page. Her heart froze when she understood the dates aligned with their affair. In short, Rykar was paying for someone else's life, and they weren't even connected to Celeste or Alira. This revelation felt like a knife twisting in her gut. Celeste had abandoned lifelong loyalty to Alira, humiliated her on that fateful night, and sold her soul for Rykar's promises. Yet here he was, siphoning money to another secret family she never knew existed. Rage built inside Celeste, a smoldering mass of hurt and betrayal. She realized with breathtaking clarity that Rykar would replace her as easily as he had replaced Alira. The trinkets, the lavish gifts, everything was an illusion. In her trembling hands, she held proof that he was already setting up a new life, an escape hatch if things went wrong. Suddenly, she understood the truth. People weren't people to him. They were commodities. Instead of confronting him immediately, Celeste plotted her next move, quietly taking pictures of every incriminating page. She had once thought Alira weak for not defending herself against Rykar's manipulations. But now, in the stinging aftermath of her own betrayal, she realized how dangerous he truly was. The woman who had once reveled in Alira's humiliation was about to discover how it felt to be disposable. Time check, folks. If you're shocked that Celeste is also a victim, tap 1. If you think she deserves every bit of this downfall, tap 2. And as always, let me know where you're following this story from. Simultaneously, Alira was readying her final blow from behind the scenes. She had brokered a secret deal with Malcolm, who was more than delighted to receive juicy evidence about Rykar's illicit dealings. In return for Alira's assistance in toppling Rykar publicly, Malcolm would ensure some of Rykar's most valuable assets were taken over, redirecting profits into new ventures, some of which would discreetly funnel back into Alira's charitable initiatives. Yet Alira wanted to be more than just a puppet master. She needed to see with her own eyes how Rykar would crumble. When she learned of an extravagant engagement gala that Rykar and Celeste were planning to host, apparently he had decided to legitimize Celeste's position after discarding Alira. She decided that would be her stage. The arrogance of hosting a public celebration so soon after discarding his pregnant wife only fueled her determination. Days before the gala, legal bombs went off one by one. Regulators began freezing assets linked to Rykar's name. A high-profile investor backed out of a crucial merger, citing fraud concerns. Journalists began poking around, led by anonymous leaks feeding them salacious details about Rykar's questionable ethics. Each blow chipped away at Rykar's empire, leaving him scrambling for damage control. Celeste herself started receiving cryptic messages from unknown numbers, each containing a snippet of evidence, an offshore banking transaction, an incriminating signature, or a time-stamped photo of Rykar's secret meetings. Rykar, frantic and furious, was convinced someone inside his trusted circle was sabotaging him. He interrogated staff, threatened business partners, and even fired a handful of employees he suspected of disloyalty. However, nothing stopped the leaks. They continued, each more damning than the last. Rykar's PR team tried to spin the story as a smear campaign, but the sheer weight of evidence was impossible to dismiss. Slowly, the public narrative shifted from venerating Rykar as a shrewd entrepreneur to vilifying him as a heartless, corrupt manipulator. Elira watched it all unfold from a safe distance, her hand gently resting on the child growing within her. She felt neither triumph nor regret. She felt only a calm certainty that justice was approaching, and this time it would not be denied. What do you think? Does Elira have this in the bag? Drop 1 if you sense victory, 2 if you expect a twist. Your thoughts mean a lot. The night of the gala arrived, a showcase of wealth and glamour held at a sprawling estate festooned with chandeliers and marble pillars. Attendees sipped imported champagne, nibbling canapes served on trays by silent waiters. Celeste floated about in a shimmering ivory gown, her face carefully set in a practiced smile, though her eyes darted nervously. She felt like a hunted animal, uncertain whether Rykar would discover her hidden knowledge or whether she might lash out at him first. Riker, for his part, played the role of an untouchable titan. He greeted guests with an overconfident grin, ignoring the whispers about his failing ventures. Publicly, he boasted he had weathered many storms and would emerge stronger than before. Privately, he was a storm of anger, complaining about uncooperative bankers and unscrupulous lawyers. Celeste caught fragments of hushed phone calls, references to hush money and last-minute favors that Rykar believed could salvage the night. Outside, in a sleek black dress, with her hair cascading in waves, Elira arrived unnoticed. She wore no jewelry, no outward sign of wealth, blending into the crowd of arrivals as if she were just another guest. Nobody had seen her face for weeks. Some rumor mills insisted she was dead. Others claimed she had fled the country in disgrace. Yet there she stood, very much alive, the swirling lights of the gala dancing off her cool, resolute gaze. Malcolm also appeared, stepping out of a limousine with an entourage. He offered Elira a brief, discreet nod, signaling that everything was in place. Over the next hour, Elira navigated the estate's crowded hallways, slipping into staff-only areas with a confidence that belied her modest attire. Eventually, she situated herself in a small observation corridor overlooking the gala's main ballroom, waiting for the perfect moment to set everything in motion. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the electric certainty that she was about to take back her narrative. Down below, Rykar and Celeste stood on a grand dais, preparing for a self-congratulatory speech about their future together. Elira quietly exhaled. Their future was about to crash under the weight of the truth. Are you ready for the confrontation? Hit 1 if you can't wait, or 2 if you're bracing for heartbreak, and feel free to share where you're joining us from. Celeste cleared her throat and tapped the microphone, plastering on a practiced smile. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of a radiant fiancé about to make some joyful announcement. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice echoing through the ballroom. Riker stood beside her, arms crossed, projecting smug confidence as if this were a coronation rather than an engagement party. A hush fell across the crowd as they waited to hear the official reason for the gathering. Then, before Celeste could speak again, a commotion at the back of the room drew every eye. A digital projector flickered to life, displaying a slideshow on the immense wall. It began with financial documents, shady wire transfers, images of shell company agreements, and Rykar's signature on suspicious contracts. Confused murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Celeste spun around, her heart dropping as she realized the images on that screen matched what she had surreptitiously photographed weeks ago. Yet she hadn't shared them with anyone. So who did? Rykar's face contorted in fury, and he spun to the tech crew, barking orders to shut it down. But the slides kept rolling, unstoppable. Next came personal pictures. Rykar and Celeste's clandestine trip to the private lake house, the ring stolen from Elira, and even a shot of Rykar in a heated argument with a known corrupt official. Gasps and shock waves rolled through the attendees. Suddenly, questions and camera flashes multiplied. And then the final blow, a short video clip showing Rykar's mocking tirade about faking a signature for the trust and bleeding that clueless wife dry. The crowd erupted in stunned disbelief. Journalists, invited to cover what was supposed to be a feel-good engagement, swarmed forward, lenses snapping. Rykar lunged toward the screen, as though he could physically tear down the damning evidence. Security guards lurched into motion, not sure whom to restrain. From her vantage point above, Elira watched the spectacle with solemn satisfaction. She had worked tirelessly to compile this damning presentation, but she'd also received a little help from a hidden ally. She glanced across the corridor and saw a sliver of ivory satin vanish around a corner. At that moment, Illyra realized Celeste might have just double-crossed Rykar in an act of personal vengeance, adding extra fuel to the fire. How do you feel about Celeste's twist? Comment 1 if it caught you off guard, 2 if you saw it coming, and keep telling us where you're reading from. Humprim. Caught in a blinding swirl of panic and camera flashes, Rykar stomped on stage, yanking the microphone from Celeste's trembling hands. "This is a setup," he roared. "Someone hacked our system." Sweating under the assault of rapid-fire questions from furious journalists, he tried to quell the tide of accusations. But it was too late. The hush that had previously fallen was now replaced by a collective outrage. Many recognized the transactions on the screen. Some were from deals they'd personally endorsed. The sense of betrayal in the room was palpable. Celeste backed away from Rykar, her once adoring gaze replaced by hollow-eyed shock. She was appalled not only by the evidence, but by how quickly Rykar dismissed her as if she weren't even worth defending. Shutters clicked, capturing her look of betrayal for the next day's headlines. In that instant, the reality she'd been avoiding for weeks struck her. Rykar had never seen her as a partner. She was a prop he could discard once she served her purpose. Security staff managed to cut the projector feed at last, plunging the room into semi-darkness. Lights flickered on again, illuminating the chaos. Rykar attempted to maintain composure, leaning into his familiar arrogance. He demanded everyone stop filming and threatened lawsuits. But the guests, many of them equally wealthy and influential, had had enough. They recognized incriminating evidence when they saw it, and they weren't about to let him silence them. Suddenly, a voice from the crowd broke through the din. "Where's Illyra?" The question sliced through the tension, prompting a wave of hushes and hushes. Rumors of Illyra's disappearance had been swirling for weeks, though few had dared bring it up in front of Rykar. Now that the question was out in the open, it ballooned in significance. Where was she? And what role did she play in these revelations? Rykar hesitated, his face twitching with a fleeting flash of fear. For the first time, the audience saw him falter. In that moment, the spotlight he had coveted for so long turned into a scorching glare of accountability. Somewhere above, in the shadows of the corridor, Illyra allowed herself the smallest, quietest smile. "Are you cheering for Illyra's reemergence? Show me with a 1. Or if you think she should stay hidden, hit 2. Stay tuned." Across the estate, in a hushed side hallway, Illyra slowly made her way downstairs. Her heart pounded like a drum, both from the adrenaline of her carefully orchestrated reveal and the residual ache of remembering the night she was left on that road. As she passed a large mirror, she caught her own reflection. Gone was the timid woman who once flinched at every insult from Rykar's pretentious circle. In her place stood someone who had walked through fire and emerged stronger, albeit scarred. Pausing at a carved wooden door that led to the main ballroom, Illyra listened to the cacophony on the other side. Questions rattled the air. Did he fake her signature? Where did that money come from? Is Illyra alive? She sighed, bracing herself. Then she pushed the door open. The crowd's attention swiveled to her in an instant. Her hair was pinned back in a simple style, and she wore a black gown that accentuated her baby bump. A visible, undeniable testament to her survival. A hush fell over the assembly. Even Celeste's eyes widened, flickering from shock to something akin to remorse. Rykar, microphone still in hand, looked thunderstruck. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though the entire universe held its breath. Then Illyra spoke, her voice clear. "I'm alive," she said, stepping forward, ignoring the cameras capturing every step. "I survived the night you left me bleeding on the road." A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Rykar began sputtering protests, claiming she was confused, that she'd run off after an argument. But Illyra never let him finish. She revealed each vital piece of evidence, describing how she learned he'd systematically drained her inheritance, forged legal documents, and prepared to discard her the moment he secured total control of her father's trust. Across the room, Malcolm watched with calculating interest, while Celeste hovered near the dais, the color draining from her face. The crowd's initial shock morphed into outrage, with some glaring daggers at Rykar. Illyra felt a strange tranquility in her chest. This was not about revenge alone. It was about ensuring the truth became irrevocable, leaving him no room to rewrite the narrative. How's everyone feeling? If you're satisfied seeing Illyra stand up for herself, type 1. If you want Celeste to suffer more consequences, type 2. Let's keep going. Riker lunged forward, desperate to seize control of the situation. His security detail tried to form a buffer, but the mass of reporters and guests pressed in, brandishing smartphones and microphones. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snarled. "She's unstable. She's lying." His words echoed in the marble hall, but they carried no real force anymore. Too many documents, too many images, and too many recordings had surfaced, all indicating his guilt. Celeste hovered at the edge of the stage, torn between fear and fury. She remembered the sweet nothings Riker once whispered in her ear, assurances that she was the only woman in his life, that they'd build a future free from the baggage of Illyra. Now she saw how easily that silver tongue flicked from one lie to the next. In a moment of clarity, she stepped closer to Illyra, standing just off to the side so the cameras wouldn't miss her expression. Without warning, Celeste lifted her hand and slapped Riker across the face. The crack resonated through the hush, leaving Riker stunned. "That," she said in a trembling voice, "was for making me believe your lies, and for everything you did to Illyra." She turned to Illyra, her eyes brimming with tears. She looked poised to speak, to apologize perhaps, but Illyra only nodded in a solemn acknowledgement. No words were necessary, the damage was already done, and no apology could fully undo their history. One by one, stunned guests started to file out, many whispering that they would never do business with Riker again. The media continued bombarding him with questions, but Riker shrank under their scrutiny. He glanced about in frantic desperation, hoping to find an ally in the crowd, but discovered only cold shoulders. This man who once ruled through intimidation and opulence was now the embodiment of disgrace. Even the thick wad of hush money he'd set aside for crisis moments couldn't buy back trust or dignity. The tide had turned irreversibly. Illyra, feeling the baby shift inside her, took one final glance around, recognizing the last shards of a world she once hoped would be her fairy tale life. If you found that slap as satisfying as I did, type 1. If you think Celeste deserves a second chance, type 2. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. In the days that followed, Riker's empire shattered like a fragile glass figurine dropped from a great height. Regulators froze his accounts, pending investigations into fraud and money laundering. Stockholders withdrew, plummeting the value of his flagship companies. High-profile lawyers refused to represent him after seeing the mountainous evidence, much of which was leaked to them anonymously, courtesy of Illyra's alliance with Malcolm and the investigator Garrett. Celeste vanished from public view, presumably retreating to a place where paparazzi couldn't hound her. A few headlines speculated that she was an accomplice in Riker's crimes, but no formal charges were filed. Whispers suggested she was quietly cooperating with authorities. The tabloids quickly turned their narrative from seductive mistress to possible informant. Regardless, she wasn't at Riker's side anymore. Meanwhile, Illyra found herself navigating a whirlwind of legal formalities. Judges commended her for her bravery, especially since she was the true heir to her late father's trust. It didn't take long for the courts to invalidate Riker's fraudulent acquisitions. Land deeds and shares he'd snatched from Illyra were returned under her name, though she had little interest in clinging to a fortune tainted by so much pain. She quietly set aside a portion for her child's future and directed much of the rest into philanthropic work. Though she had the legal high ground, Illyra showed little hunger for vengeance beyond ensuring Riker faced justice. She didn't gloat. She didn't attend any of his hearings in person. She simply allowed the system and the tide of public opinion to deliver the punishment he so richly deserved. The once dazzling social star was now an outcast facing potential jail time, and it seemed any plea bargains he might attempt would be overshadowed by the sheer volume of evidence. On a drizzly afternoon, Illyra visited the quiet cemetery where her father rested. She placed fresh wildflowers against the headstone. Standing there pregnant and emotionally spent, she whispered thanks, both to him and to her own strength. Despite every wound, every sleepless night, she had survived. More than that, she had reclaimed her life. We're nearing the final stretch. If you're relieved that Alira's on a path to healing, comment 1. If you want one last dramatic twist, comment 2. But don't be shy. In the following weeks, Alira traveled back to the small town where her life had once been simple. She revisited childhood haunts, old cafes that still served the same sweet pastries she'd adored in her youth. It felt surreal, thinking of how far she'd come, from an innocent woman seeking acceptance in Rykar's dazzling world, to the determined survivor who dismantled his empire. Townspeople greeted her kindly, many offering quiet support once they recognized who she was. She also reconnected with Mr. Faraday, expressing her gratitude. He'd known her father and had always treated her as the daughter of a good man, rather than a tool to be exploited. Over tea in his warm, cluttered office, Alira confessed she wasn't certain what to do with her reinstated fortune. "My father would have wanted me to help people, not hoard wealth," she said thoughtfully, sipping her tea. Mr. Faraday offered a reassuring smile, telling her that she could forge her own legacy, a testament to her father's love but not shackled by it. Encouraged by his words, Alira founded a nonprofit initiative, funneling significant resources into shelters for women escaping domestic violence. She named it the New Dawn Foundation, envisioning a place where no woman would feel trapped as she once had. She vowed to invest in legal assistance, counseling, and education, remembering how pivotal support had been when she felt most alone. News of her charitable work gradually replaced the scandal headlines that had once dominated tabloids. Reporters reached out, desperate for interviews, but Alira declined most requests. She wasn't looking for fame or sympathy. She wanted only to ensure that something good came from her suffering, that her child would grow up in a world where compassion and empathy held value over greed and betrayal. Meanwhile, rumors whispered of Celeste trying to rebuild her life in another city, possibly out of the country. There were also murmurings of Malcolm forging powerful new partnerships in the absence of Rykar's influence. Yet for Alira, these were distant echoes. She had stepped off the chessboard entirely. All that mattered now was preparing for the birth of her child, free from the shadow of the man who once nearly destroyed her. How do you feel about Alira's decision to focus on helping others? 1, if it inspires you. 2, if you were hoping for a different outcome. I love hearing your reactions. At long last, under a canopy of clear autumn skies, Alira gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Holding him in her arms, she felt every tear, every bruise, and every betrayal fade into a distant memory. She named him Ashen, honoring a favorite poem her father once recited about a phoenix rising from ashes stronger than before. The infant's eyes were bright, and his tiny hand clutched at Alira's finger, with a force that made her laugh through joyous tears. She never doubted that she'd raise him to know love and respect, to value honesty over empty glamour. It wouldn't be an easy path, but Alira no longer feared challenges. She would show him, by living example, how to stand firm in one's truth, even when the world tried to crush it. In time, she would tell him the story of how she once believed wealth and status could buy happiness, only to learn that true worth lay in self-respect, compassion, and moral courage. On a chilly winter's day, Alira stood outside the bustling New Dawn Foundation headquarters, watching the swirl of visitors who came to volunteer or seek assistance. The facility was housed in a repurposed mansion, once owned by one of Rykar's former associates, who'd forfeited it under legal pressure. What had been a place of elitist gatherings was now a haven for those in need. Alira greeted each visitor with a gentle smile, offering a listening ear or a referral to counseling services. For her, this was the closure she needed, turning something corrupted by greed into a sanctuary of empathy. Occasionally, she spotted news items about Rykar's ongoing legal battles. He was indicted on multiple charges, and his assets were auctioned off to compensate the trust in other victims. Celeste was rumored to have testified against him, presenting her own trove of incriminating evidence. Through it all, Alira remained steadfast in her decision not to appear in court. She had already spoken her truth. Now the law would handle the rest. When she finally returned home that evening and scooped Ashen into her arms, she felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She realized that fate didn't just strike back, it also guided her to a place of renewal and purpose. And as her son cooed softly against her, she knew that in forging her own destiny, she had become more than a survivor. She was the architect of a life built on hope, integrity, and unbreakable love. Thank you for taking this long journey with Alira. Let's hear from you one last time. 1. If you found her story empowering. 2. If you would have ended it differently. And please let me know where you've been reading this from. I love hearing about your corners of the world. All content here is crafted in adherence to fair use guidelines and is an original reimagining of the core plot. Thank you for reading.